Hello, everyone. Welcome to our regular installment of Oh Yum 101 live here on the Oh Yum YouTube channel. It's my pleasure to be with you again. And I would also like to offer a shout out to all the essential workers out there who are doing their part to keep us safe, keep us strong, and also in terms of keeping us healthy, that's one part, keeping us also well fed. So thank you to all of you. Hello to all my regulars who are watching. Of course, my mom and dad and Kathy, T. We've got, who else is watching? We've got Suzanne watching, Bonnie watching, and I'll shout out to whoever I can, but I know you love to participate, and I love to hear from you too. You voted for it. Today's Oh Yum 101 is about chocolate mousse. So I'm not just going to make one type of chocolate mousse. I'm going to make two types of chocolate mousse because it really allows me to talk about the styles of mousse, different types of chocolate, and different uses for mousse because it is a foundation element in baking. And then I didn't want to leave you just with mousse. Let's make it more exciting. I have a brand new secret recipe that I will be making in front of you after I get the two mousses done. So you have to stay with me. Remember, it's something that goes with chocolate mousse. Your guesses have been pretty good. I've been following along. The hint was it is something round. There were lots of chocolate guesses too. Let's see. What could it be? I'm not going to tell you now. We're going to jump right into the very first chocolate mousse recipe. And this is a classic dark chocolate mousse. Pardon me. Um, this is the type you would serve in a dish, a parfait glass, and it is just meant to be enjoyed on its own. So it's about the punch of chocolate intensity balanced with the airiness of the mousse texture. And that's what makes the bitter chocolate work in a mousse. You've got this volume of air worked in there. Think of it as a chilled souffle without the stress of souffle. So the recipe, the original recipe can be found right here on Oh Yum 101. I'm going to walk you through it. We've picked up quite a few questions going through the recipe and that you've left here. So I want to be able to tell you, answer those questions as we go through. This is based on a classic French style recipe. Now it starts off with 7 ounces, so 210 grams of bittersweet chocolate. And I call for bittersweet chocolate specifically because I want that chocolate intensity. In bittersweet chocolate, which is 60 to 70% chocolate cocoa solids, you've got less room for cocoa butter and you have less room for sugar and other ingredients. And so you're left with that intense chocolate. You can substitute semi-sweet in a 1-to-1 measurement in this recipe without any problem. Just know that with the addition of the whipped cream and the egg whites afterwards, it will be a milder chocolate. But the set should be exactly the same. Now, my preferred method for melting chocolate is to do it stovetop. And I've got a pot here with filled with just a couple of centimeters of water, and you can see there's steam coming up, but no bubbles, no boiling whatsoever. It's the steam hitting the bottom of the metal bowl. And when I'm melting chocolate, I do prefer to use a metal bowl because the heat conducts quickly. And when I pull it off the heat, it cools down quickly. And that's what I want, especially if you're getting into chocolate work and tempering chocolate, you want to be able to control your temperatures. I've added 2 tablespoons of butter to the mix, and I'm going to melt that together at the same time. And you'll notice this is what I am doing. Just chatting with you, hanging out, nothing. When your chocolate is starting to melt, it's such a low temperature, just let that gentle heat get through the chocolate a little bit before you need to stir. You're going to have plenty of opportunity to stir it um, as you go through the process. So I'm just looking for, I can see on the surface of the bowl around the outside edge that the chocolate is melting a little bit. Keep in mind when you're melting chocolate and butter together that chocolate melts at a lower temperature than butter. So your butter may be your last bits that you see when you're melting your chocolate. But isn't that why we love chocolate? Because it melts below body temperature. So when you put it on the tip of your tongue and it just melts away into nothingness, oh, it's so, so, so good. Now, this style of mousse that I'm making, the combination of melted chocolate, adding whipped cream and whipped egg whites, and I will get to the egg white topic. It's a big one. Um, is not the kind to use for filling a cake, um, or even a tart for that matter. It has a nice set and a creaminess, but it's meant to be eaten out of a dish with a spoon. So there is no added gelatin to it or anything else to stabilize it. It's as simple a technique as you can have making a mousse, but it delivers that creamy flavor. Okay, in that little bit of chatting right now, I'm going to give this a stir. And I know, Michael, you've been doing a fabulous job as our director of photography. It's hard to shoot a metal bowl because it reflects and you can't see through it. I will transfer to glass later, but I do prefer melting the chocolate like this. I tend to avoid melting chocolate in a microwave simply because I find it doesn't take much longer to do it stovetop. And a microwave, if you have that heat setting wrong, ooh, all of a sudden, 2 seconds later, it goes from being perfectly melted to burnt. And I can recover a lot of things once you burn your chocolate. There's no going back. White chocolate, particularly, is quite delicate. So I don't know if you can see here, but there are still bits of butter visible. So I'm just stirring gently. But you'll notice there's no steam escaping from the side of the pot that and the bowl. That's very important because if your water was too hot, you would risk having chocolate steam come up the sides, condense over the bowl, and then if you get a droplet of water in the melting process, it can seize your chocolate. That is not the end of the world. A little quick fix, if you've ever seized your chocolate, you take it off the heat, and you know it's seized because it goes from shiny and smooth to all of a sudden dull and granular looking. And that is the separation of the cocoa fat, the cocoa butter from the solid. So you need to bring them back together. Strangely, the fix is what caused the problem. So what you do is you take your seized chocolate, and this is off the heat, just dip your fingers, clean fingers in water, add a few droplets to the center of the bowl, and then you stir where you added that water, and you'll watch that chocolate bond together. And then you widen the stirring circle, and you'll find that that chocolate comes back and is ready to use. Now, I still see a few pieces of chocolate visible here, but I'm going to take this off the heat. And I'm going to get my pot off the heat too. And out of habit, I tend to pull my chocolate off the heat before it's fully melted because the actual heat of the chocolate itself will continue melting the remaining pieces of chocolate. And this now, my metal bowl is cooling down. And I'm going to scrape this into a glass bowl. This is only so you can see what I'm doing. There is no technical reason for it, although the cool bowl right now will help cool the chocolate down a little bit. I don't worry too much about timing here. In the time that I get through explaining the next steps, and this is how the recipe is laid out for you, melt your chocolate, set it aside, take care of your other elements, and that's really the time that this chocolate needs to cool down right away. So let me pop to the fridge and grab my whipped cream. Now the cream itself, I've already whipped. So this is 1 cup or 250 ml of fluid cream, and there's nothing added to it. I just whipped it right before we started, so it's chilled. You can do it in the moment using electric beaters or a stand mixer if you have it. An easy measurement to keep in mind is that 1 cup of fluid whipping cream whips up to 2 cups of whipped cream. So if you're ever doing, we're all mad bakers, right? And you've got a bunch of things on the go, and say you need to whip up a whole bunch of whipped cream to use in different places, you know how to measure it out by volume after you've whipped it. So it doubles in volume. If you're using a non-dairy whipped cream for whatever reason, that sometimes goes to a bigger volume, even up to 3 times its volume. So just keep that in mind. So now, instead of adding my flavoring to my chocolate, which because this is just melted chocolate with a hint of butter, it could risk splitting. You want to introduce new ingredients to chocolate very carefully and gently. just like as we're going to get back into society. We're going to do it gradually and we're going to do it carefully. Like these COVID comparisons. This is what it's come to. Um, I like to add coffee to my chocolate mousse, and I have brewed a cup of espresso coffee and let it cool. This is 60 ml or a quarter cup, just straight espresso coffee. If you don't want to add coffee flavor to it, you could do something like tea, and that's a great opportunity to introduce a flavor. If it's a flavored tea, imagine Earl Grey tea in there. It would be absolutely delicious. It would also mellow the chocolate flavor. I go for the chocolate here. When I make chocolate cakes, I often put coffee in there for the exact same reason, not to make it taste like coffee, but to really bolster and push forward that delicious chocolate flavor. So I'm adding it to my whipped cream. I'll just pour it right in. And you'll see the recipe calls for 3 tablespoons of brandy. That is completely optional. It's up to you. That's based on the classic French recipe. It just gives it a little spark, but you can, of course, do without it. Now, you'll notice how that adding that coffee really softened up the cream. That's okay. That's factored into the recipe. So don't be worried, and you don't have to try and re-whip it or do anything different to it because that liquid is in there now. So just you can let that be. If you were not using the brandy, you don't have to replace that 3 tablespoons with any other liquid. You can just let it be as is, as I'm doing right here. So let's talk about egg whites because a lot of you have asked, both in the chocolate mousse recipe and through my social media feeds, etc. And I specifically, Tia and Christian John were asking about, is it okay to use raw egg whites in baking? And the rules, when I checked the Canadian standards from the Canadian Egg Marketing Board and Health Canada, they say that softly cooked or undercooked eggs are safe for the most part for most people. And again, here is a COVID comparison. If you are immune compromised, elderly, or a child, you should not consume raw eggs. So I have good news as an option because in this recipe, I don't call for cooking the eggs in any way. What you can do is use cartoned liquid egg whites. They have been pasteurized. So then they are fully safe to use in any meringue recipe you might have called for that doesn't need cooking. So that's safety tip number one. Another great question I'm asked a lot because I know you're watching me from around the world, that if you're in Europe or in Mexico or South America, I can't remember what the rules are in Southeast Asia, but um, eggs are sold unrefrigerated. Where here in North America, Canada, and the US, our eggs are sold refrigerated. And you might wonder, well, what's the difference? The difference is in North America, our eggs, when they go through the grading system, are also washed. And it takes off a natural protective surface on the outside of the egg. It cleans the egg, but it means then from that point on, they must be stored refrigerated. Where in other countries, that surface is left on. It's kind of nature's protection, and therefore the eggs don't have to be refrigerated, but they should be consumed within, I would say, about 5 days. So I hope that gives you some good information. I'm just going to take a peek here before I get into whipping my egg whites to see what kind of questions you're asking me. I'm also giving a little chance for my dark chocolate to cool. Now, remember, after this, I'm going to get into my white chocolate mousse. Now, this is a style that suits cake and piping. And then after that comes the secret recipe. So we've got lots to good look forward to. So I'm just going to stretch it out a little bit and check out your questions here. I love seeing them on the feed here. And just to let you know, this whole video, including the new recipe, will appear on the OEM channel. So if you have to tune out now or you're just joining now, you can watch the whole thing from start to finish soon after I wrap things up here. Oh, new subscribers, Marianne. Nadim is asking, do I have a coconut lemon curd recipe? I have a couple of delicious lemon curd recipes, and I do have a recipe for a lemon coconut cake that is pretty fabulous. So I would check that one out for the lemon coconut curd recipe. And I notice you notice how I bake my dacquoise for quite a bit, where some dacquoise recipes call for a short bake. When I'm making a coconut dacquoise, because of the weight of the coconut, I find to really dry out and get a good crisp dacquoise shell. And a dacquoise is a meringue style cake layer, but it has no flour. It usually has either nuts or coconut in its place. I find the weight of the coconut takes a longer cook time. If I'm doing an almond dacquoise using ground almonds or hazelnuts or walnuts, then I can bake at a shorter time. So that's a great question. Greetings from Jamaica. Hello. Oh, and Christine has made the coconut lemon cake, so she knows. Oh, and a good, Ivanka's asking using dry coconut. Well, here in Canada, we don't have access to the best fresh coconuts. I've been to Southeast Asia and know how good fresh coconut is, but we deal with dried, unappealing world desiccated coconut. So it's dry flaked. You can get it sweetened, unsweetened, and depending on, I find I tend to gravitate towards sweetened coconut because it tends to be more tender when you use it in a recipe. So great questions. Shabana asked, "How am I?" I'm doing okay. Still doing the once a week grocery shop, so I'm managing my lessons based on what ingredients I have on hand. I have chocolate. I have whipped cream with coffee. Now I'm ready to get back to whipping my 3 egg whites, and I'm going to turn on the mixer. I'll add a pinch of salt, bit to balance flavor, a bit to stretch the egg white. No cream of tartar required here. And now I'm going to whip this until it's foamy, and I'll add 3 tablespoons of sugar, 45 ml by volume. So this is not a very stable meringue. It needs to get used immediately. So you don't want to start this process until you're ready to start assembling your mousse. The egg whites are room temperature because they will whip to a better volume. Oh, here's a great tip. If you are baking using the carton liquid pasteurized egg whites, they will by nature take a little bit longer to whip. So just be patient. It's not you, it's just the nature of the egg whites, but you can get exactly the same volume out of liquid egg whites that you can a fresh egg. So I'm just whipping to a soft peak. So nice and light, a little movement in the egg whites. Got some flexibility to it. So these are good to go. And let me get this mixer out of the way because I don't need it anymore. All right, let's bring the activity close to me. Get my coffee cup out of the way. So the golden rule when making a mousse that calls for whipped cream and egg whites, if you're ever wondering and you don't want to go back to the recipe, egg whites always go in last. They're the most fragile and the most delicate, and so they should always be folded in at the very end. So first goes the whipped cream, and I'm going to introduce it gradually to the chocolate. Introduce it. Hey, chocolate, meet the cream. Cream, how you doing? Meet the chocolate. This is to even out the temperatures. If I were to add that cold cream to the warm, well, it's room temperature now, chocolate all at once, it could seize up and then you get little pieces of chocolate. We want a smooth, fluffy mousse. Pull from the bottom. You can see the streaking of the dark chocolate from the bottom of the bowl. That's okay. I can already feel it starting to set. It changes texture. This is what I love about baking. Even though there's nothing going in the oven with a mousse, it's still part of the baking world and part of that adventure. And baking, I think the reason we all enjoy it and we're spending this time together is because it is about all of the senses, and you have to rely on your sense of touch when you're folding in the cream to the chocolate to feel when you're there, to feel when it's right, to feel, do I have to go faster? Is it chilling too quickly? We're doing just fine here. But you can see that lightness of color coming in. And I should actually, this is a great opportunity for me to bring up the point that using semi-sweet and bittersweet chocolate in recipes, that is interchangeable. You cannot interchange milk or white chocolate in place of dark chocolate in a recipe. So if you were to try and make this recipe with white chocolate mousse, you would not get the same set because the combination of cocoa powder and cocoa solids In milk chocolate, there's more cocoa butter, less solids. In white chocolate, there are no cocoa solids. That's why it's white. And you'll find it's too soft. So you have to follow a different formula or recipe. And that's why next I'm going to be making a white chocolate mousse. Now, the same thing, I'm going to fold my egg whites in 2 additions. And this is where I like to start getting a little speedier, because when it comes to folding in egg whites, time is the enemy. And they can take a bit of action here. So I'm still pulling from the bottom, I'm working them in. And if you still see some streaks of egg white in there, that's okay, so long as it's before the final addition of the egg whites. That's when you want to make sure you have it nicely combined. How's everyone doing? You good? Feeling it? Up close and personal with some chocolate mousse here. I'm sure, Michael, you've got a super shot. Can I fold mousse and take questions at the same time?
A lot of questions about aquafaba.
Ah, very good question. In place of egg whites, aquafaba is the liquid left from canned beans or chickpeas, and it whips up lovely into egg whites. Your choice if to use it in making, if you're using vegan chocolate, you would use a non-dairy whipped cream. You could use aquafaba. I would definitely recommend adding the coffee to the recipe for the strength of flavor, because while the egg whites work and then the chocolate will set beautifully, you may find you get a hint of hummus to your chocolate mousse, and that may not be what you're after. So this is where adding the coffee would be very, very helpful. All right, doesn't that look luscious and smooth? Oh, yeah, look at that fluffy lightness. So I'm going to stop stirring now, because I could just do that compulsively. It's so gratifying. And I'm going to go for, if you're okay, Michael, this recipe makes 6 to 8 servings. Clearly, we're not having people over for dinner in the near future. It's just Michael and I. So I'm going to do 4 large cups, and this will be a chocolate mousse we can share. How's that? This recipe cuts in half easily. If you're in the same boat, go grab a ladle. And depending how cool or warm your chocolate was, you may find it's easier to pour, scoop. You could even pipe it into the cups. Just gonna focus here. No drips. And I will pop these in the fridge to set, because we still have the white chocolate mousse to make and the secret recipe to make. So I will pull it out at the end so we can look at everything we've created. If you're making this mousse along with me, I hope you've had good luck and a similar looking result.
How long does it stay good for?
Oh, that's a good question. I find a mousse like this, you can cover it if you want, if it's going to spend a couple of days in the fridge. I wouldn't leave it for more than, say, 3 days, just because of the air in the mousse. Because anything with dairy or the air will absorb. You definitely don't put the garlic kielbasa next to the chocolate mousse, or it will just absorb those odors. But really, for the optimal taste and texture, because it will start drying out in the fridge, is about 3 days. But really, yeah, I would go 3 days. Let's just leave it at that. It's a tough question, because I don't know that I've ever had them in the fridge longer than 3 days. They usually disappear. There we go. Okay, enough fussing. I'm fussing. I'm just messing about here. Okay, I'm going to pop these in the fridge, and then we can move on to our white chocolate mousse recipe. And you know, I put them on that tray on the napkin for your benefit. If I was just making them and it was Michael and I'd just throw the cups in the fridge and let them be and cram other things around it, but created some space for you. So I hope you appreciate it. Okay, white chocolate mousse. Let's get at it. Now, the recipe that you see on my Oh Yum channel is associated with a cranberry chocolate, a white chocolate mousse tart, which is absolutely lovely. So I'm just making the mousse portion from that recipe so we can see the comparative. Making sure I have everything I need. Here it is. There we go. Okay, so this white chocolate mousse recipe is a style that suits, um, pardon me, that suits piping or cake filling, whether on the outside of a cake or inside. So, meaning it holds its shape when you cut into it, but yet the texture is such that when you bite into it, it still melts away just like the chocolate mousse that's in the cups. That's all about creating the balance between the chocolate, the whipped cream, and the foundation. So, to give this mousse some body, I'm making a simple version of a pastry cream. Now, if you joined me last week, I made a caramel pastry cream, and that was following a classic pastry cream formula. Well, this one is a little bit lighter. It's not thickened quite as much because we have the white chocolate to give the mousse some body and structure too. So I'm just going to turn my milk on. I'm going to separate my eggs. Just as a note, I'm making a half recipe for the simple practical reason is that I only had enough white chocolate to do a half recipe and have one chilled and ready for you. So these days, you can't just pop out to the store for a single ingredient. So I hope you don't mind, but I'm showing you the volume you get, and you can make that choice if you want to do 2 or 1. The recipe itself, the base recipe calls for 3 egg yolks. If you wanted, you could take one of these yolks, take a teaspoon and cut the yolk in half, pull out a tablespoon, and then you'd have your 1.5 egg yolks. I've made this with the 2 egg yolks. It's absolutely fine. It's such a small measure. It doesn't really make a big difference. I've got a tablespoon of cornstarch and a tablespoon and a half of granulated sugar. And I'll add that to my egg yolks right before my milk is ready. So I'm going to just make sure that comes up to a full simmer. I don't add vanilla to the pastry cream or the mousse at all. And you probably noticed I didn't do that for the tart chocolate mousse either, because the chocolate itself is the singular flavor. And in most chocolates, there is some vanilla flavoring. So check your ingredients and it'll tell you if it's in there. White chocolate definitely has vanilla in it. So you rarely have to add extra. I have 4 ounces, so 120 grams of chopped white chocolate. Now, just as a note, I had white chocolate chips for chocolate chip cookies kicking around. You cannot use chocolate chips for cookies in baking. You need to use couverture or baking chocolate, so it comes in blocks or squares, and you have to cut it up. And the reason you have to do that is chocolate chips are made to hold their shape, baked into cookies. But in this recipe, you need a fluid, smooth white chocolate. And you'll find if you melt just regular chocolate chips that they're kind of grainy and it doesn't turn shiny. So you do need to use the baking chocolate. It comes in bars or blocks. I've got a tablespoon of butter added to it, and it's adding the hot pastry cream to the chocolate itself that will melt it and immediately cool it down so that I can add the whipped cream. So this is another great recipe because you don't have to space out the timing of making it over the course of a morning. It pretty much comes together as is. I'm getting some steam on my milk, but this is an important topic. I'm going to pull these. I'll give you a second, Michael, if you can see these. We're going to do a little talk through on gelatin, if that's okay, because I've had people asking me about gelatin, using gelatin. In North America, um, for home cooks, powdered gelatin is the most common. It looks like this. It's got little grains to it. And you want to make sure you buy the unflavored, no cherry or orange flavor. In Europe and in professional kitchens, we like to use gelatin sheets. This is the exact same product, just in a different form. Gelatin sheets offer you a little more precision. They look like they're plastic, and the equivalent is 3 sheets of gelatin equals 1 teaspoon of gelatin powder if you're making the conversion. Now there are different grades of gelatin. These are platinum, meaning they're super thin sheets. Then you get gold, silver, and bronze, and they get thicker and thicker, so you have less control in a sheet. So I like going for the platinum. What is common between these gelatins is they have to be bloomed before you can use them. You need to soften them in cold water before you begin. So if you're using gelatin sheets, you can crack them in half and you just put them in a bowl of cool water. You don't have to measure the water. The gelatin absorbs as much as it can take. That's why it needs to be cooled, because you don't want it to melt. And then you squeeze it out and you add it to your mousse mixture. In the case of powdered gelatin, you need to measure your water. So I've got a tablespoon and a half. And I'll just give that a little stir. It only takes a second. If I were to add this powdered gelatin or the sheet gelatin to my hot liquid without letting it soften up in water, it wouldn't dissolve. You would get the grains. So you really have to do this process. So I tend to do this first before I start my other ingredients. Now, a question. You were asking me some great question about aquafaba, and we were talking about non-dairy whipped cream. This is not vegetarian friendly. So if you're looking for a vegetarian option, agar powder or agar flakes, this is agar flakes, and it is a seaweed algae that's been dried. This is a fabulous way to thicken ingredients. You see it in a lot of delicious South Asian desserts, and it gives things their sort of gum or texture. Now, the difference between using them, you use the exact same measure. So if a recipe calls for a tablespoon of gelatin powder, you would use a tablespoon of agar. The difference is you don't bloom it, and agar needs to come to a full boil to activate it. So gelatin gets added at the very end of the mousse assembly process before you add the whipped cream. The agar has to go into the milk. You have to make sure that milk comes up to a full simmer. If you're replacing the eggs, you would use silken tofu to smooth it out, and it would help give that protein set to your pastry cream, or you could simply use extra cornstarch. So I hope that gives you some great information. I do love playing with the recipes. I find sometimes vegan baking takes thinking completely differently than the conventional training, but there are some options that really allow you to take a classic French recipe and adapt it to vegan cooking. I'm going to return this back to my simmer, and now, I don't know if you can see, this is all of a sudden gummy and thickened now. So that's good to go. I'll add my cornstarch and sugar to my egg yolks. Give that a quick stir. And if you caught me making the caramel pastry cream last week, you know what I'm doing. I'm tempering the eggs with the sugar to equalize the heat, as opposed to adding the cold eggs to the hot pot. Goes right back in. And this is a small volume. Remember, this is a half recipe, so it's not going to take long to cook. I'm using induction heat, and even with the precision of induction heat or gas, I still like to be the temperature control. So I tend to lift up and put down the pot, because that's faster than playing with the dials and getting the heat right. You need to really see this come to a full simmer to know that the cornstarch is got its full thickening power. As soon as I start seeing it tighten up on the bottom, I want to get the heat away from the bottom, and you can see now that it's worked through a little bit, a little tighter. There, look at that glossiness. And I just saw a bubble break the surface, so I know it hit 212. So now, just grab a little spoon. You take the custard off the heat, and then you add your gelatin. And just the heat of the custard itself will dissolve the gelatin. You'll also find it'll liquefy. All of a sudden, it goes a lot thinner looking. That's part of the recipe. That's just how it behaves. So it almost looks more like a custard sauce. Now, while it's still hot, I'm going to scrape this through a strainer over my 4 ounces of chopped white baking chocolate. And I did see a question come through about brands of baking chocolate. It really depends on what you have available. It's hard for me to speak to it because there are so many brands depending where you are around the world. But ask your local pastry chef in a bakery what they prefer using, and that's a good place to start. Every bit of that custard. So now this custard, this pastry cream, is creating the stable base for this chocolate mousse. And now we're immediately cooling down the custard because of the white chocolate, and the butter is melting in. And the color doesn't really change. White chocolate has this sort of natural butter yellow color to it. I know some people love it, some people hate it. If you were doing a dark chocolate version, you would reduce the amount of chocolate. This recipe factors in the set of white chocolate, which is a softer set than dark chocolate. And you'll notice when I was melting the dark chocolate, just the straight dark chocolate with a touch of butter, I was using a spatula. You want to be gentle when you're melting straight dark chocolate. When you're adding something like making a ganache or adding this cream, now you've got so much of an other ingredient that whisking is okay. So I can see now this is fully melted. There we go. Sure, I'm gonna go grab, because I've whipped my cream already for this. There we go. Now, because this is a half recipe, I took a half a cup of fluid cream, whipped it, so I end up with about a full cup. And I'm just going to check with my finger the temperature of, yeah, I'm good. That amount of white chocolate really does cool down the pastry cream. You can let it, if it's a hot, humid day, it may take a little longer to cool to room temperature. You might want to give it about 10, 15 minutes extra. You can tell when it's time to add the cream because the gelatin will actually start setting as the chocolate cools around the outside. So if you're ever wondering, you don't have to cover this like a pastry cream with plastic wrap. Just give it a swirl, and if you start seeing it pull at the sides, then it's time to fold in the cream. If by accident you leave it go too long and it starts setting up on you, yep, I've done that. You can just gently rewarm it, do the water bath, put it over a pot of barely simmering water. You don't want to cook the custard anymore. You just want to soften up that gelatin, and you'll find it goes smooth on you and you're good to go. Okay, I'm going to fold in the cream in 2 additions. Out of habit, always 2 additions. And that cold cream immediately will start setting the chocolate. And again, a few streaks are okay because I still have more cream to add. Oh, you know what time it is? We're getting close to the secret recipe time. What could it be? Is it going to be a cheesecake? Is it going to be a chocolate cake? You know, it's something I want to make in front of you start to finish. And I did tell you I wanted to use my mousse. I'm not going to tell you yet. Got to stay with me. So there we go. You've got the cream. It has fluidity. And this is common when you're making most chocolate mousse. Once you've folded in your cream or egg whites, you will find it soft. It's supposed to be. So at this point, I like to let this mousse sit in the bowl, in the fridge for about an hour to 90 minutes. You can make it a full day ahead of time, but I like to have it set but not fully set when I'm piping it. If I'm using it for a cake, this is when it can be poured into your mold and then your cake assembled around it or the mousse on top. When you're using a mousse like this, you want to use it while it is still fluid, and always make sure if you're assembling it um, with layers of a cake without cake on the sides, assemble it in a mold or a springform pan. Line the outside of the pan with, or the inside of the pan with parchment paper or acetate. Put in your cake layer, mousse goes in, cake layer goes on top. Or if you're doing the inverted style, you would pour the mousse into the pan, press your cake layers in, and freeze it upside down. So this mousse can be used for that. Okay, so I'm gonna pop this in the fridge, and I'm gonna draw it out even more. Before I reveal what the secret recipe is, I'm gonna take a few questions from you. So let's take a look here. Is the secret recipe marble mousse? Well, that is actually a brilliant guess, but no, very smart guess. Hello from Nepal. Wow, thank you. And thank you for staying up late to join us. Baked Alaska. Choo, choo, choo. Oh, sifting dry ingredients. And most of the time, oh, that's a good question. Okay, so a hint about this recipe I'm going to make. I will be using a sifter to sift my dry ingredients. And if I'm ever making something light and fluffy, like a cake style recipe, I always sift my dry ingredients. If I'm making something simple like a cookie, sometimes I just combine the dry ingredients. But the choice of sifter, I tend to use a strainer or a mesh flat sifter. That's called a tammy. And that's actually, okay, hint number one, I have my dry ingredients for my secret recipe. So this is called a tammy, this mesh sifter. Pastry chefs in a commercial kitchen will use it because they come bigger and you can sift just over a sheet of parchment paper, lift the parchment and dump it into your big mixer when you're making big recipes. A mesh strainer, I find they're just easy to stack in my cupboard because I have so many pots and pans and baking tools. You can use the sifter with a little handle, but I find sometimes you get build up around where the sifting element is. So I tend to just use a mesh sifter because it's handy and multi-purpose at the same time. So you can see I've got some chocolate in here. I've got all-purpose flour and some cocoa. And I'm going to start bringing my ingredients over because I'm making a batter. And I've preheated my oven to 400 degrees. And I should tell you right now that this recipe, all the ingredients and the method will appear on this video once we cut and get it posted on the Oh Yum site. TJ does that for me. Hi, TJ. You will be able to recreate this recipe. And I wanted to pick something because you're such amazing bakers. I love seeing what you post on Oh Yum 101, the hashtag on Facebook and on Instagram. It's amazing what you're doing. And I know there are all levels of bakers. You've got some of you are baking with young people or you're just starting into baking. And I wanted to give you a recipe that is easy and workable. But I know there are you expert bakers who love spending time on your decor work and decorating and get really expressive and creative. So I wanted that same recipe to suit all levels. So as I bring everything over, we are going to make the fluffiest chocolate baked donuts. No, fluffy is an understatement. These are amazing. And it's a simple batter with ingredients I bet you might have on hand, or I can walk you through what to do. So I want to bake these chocolate fluffy donuts for you and then top them with that luscious white chocolate mousse for what will end up tasting like an elegant chocolate mousse cake with a fraction of the effort. So this batter is as simple as a muffin or a cupcake batter. So you want to start with your big bowl with your dry ingredients. So I have 3/4 of a cup or 150 grams of granulated sugar. And I'm going to add to that 3/4 of a, are you ready? You ready for these donuts? The suspense is over. Oh, people, okay, thank you. People seem really excited. Glad you're on board. Um, 3/4 of a cup of buttermilk. So that's 175 ml. And so you can see that buttermilk has this sort of natural thickness to it, even though it is only 1% butterfat. People sometimes think buttermilk is fatty because of the word butter, but it is actually what is left from the butter making process. The reason I call for buttermilk in this recipe as opposed to straight milk is buttermilk has a tartness. It has acidity built into it that's going to react with my baking powder, and I need that lift, big lift, to make these baked donuts nice and fluffy. And so if you don't have buttermilk, it's okay. You can create your own. Measure out your buttermilk, pull away 2 teaspoons for this volume, and replace that with 2 teaspoons of lemon juice or white vinegar. Give it a little stir, let it sit for a minute, and you're going to watch the milk almost curdles a little bit. Ideally, you want to use 1 or 2% milk. Whole milk will work fine. You can't use skim milk, though, in this recipe. That adds the acidity and the thickness that you want in this recipe. So just like making banana bread or a simple muffin recipe, you combine all your wet ingredients together. And I consider sugar a wet ingredient because it dissolves into everything when I stir it. In addition to the 175 ml of buttermilk, the 150 grams of sugar, or 3/4 of a cup, I've got a 1/4 cup, 60 ml of vegetable oil, plus 1 teaspoon of vanilla. In that goes. And I need a new whisk. And I just whisk this all together. Nothing more complicated than that. All right, now that that's combined, I've got 1 1/4 cups of all-purpose flour. That's 185 grams. And I have 30 grams, or that's a 1/4 cup of cocoa powder. Now I'm using Dutch processed cocoa powder in this recipe. You can tell by the dark color. It too it's like the bittersweet chocolate. It's got intensity, but it's a little milder tasting than conventional chocolate. They are interchangeable here, but I find I get a punchier dark color from using Dutch processed cocoa powder. Black cocoa powder is now available more to home bakers. You have to be careful when you use black cocoa powder because it has a lower fat content, half the fat content of Dutch processed cocoa. And so you may find things like your fluffy baked donuts look delicious, but they might be a little drier than normal. So I would go for the conventional or the Dutch processed cocoa here. 2 teaspoons of baking powder and half a teaspoon of salt. I give this a sift. And I add it all at once to my base mixture. And this makes a relatively loose batter. I find it depends on the cocoa you use. Tidy up here. No messes here. And I just whisk this to combine it. How's that for easy? We've been cooking together for just over 45 minutes today. So I wanted to make something that was realistic, approachable, but add a little sparkle of interest. And you know, the minute I'm ready for my Oh Yum 101, I'm already thinking about the next one. And so, oh my gosh, we have TJ, who you see writing on the thread as I'm talking because I'm busy. I'm just going to smooth it out a bit. So see how this kind of has a pudding texture to it. I'm going to smooth it out. You don't want to see any lumps. Back to that. So we were talking about how much we love your feedback, your input. You're such loyal viewers and such great bakers that maybe we should put you in charge of the next Oh Yum 101. You get to vote, as you do every week. But instead of me being the executive pastry chef, I think I'll be the sous chef, and you're going to direct what I make. What do you think about that? More details to come. We're working it out. So once you've whisked this until there are no lumps visible, it does have a luscious look to it. You can choose to pour it, or if you're adventurous, you can pipe it into your donut pans. Now, it is true, to make baked donuts, you need a donut pan. So it's just like a muffin tin, except of course with the donut shape. You can bake these in a muffin tin as a cupcake if you don't have it. I don't want you to not make these. And then you could use the white chocolate mousse instead of frosting and just blow people's minds with the lightness and the fluffiness. The reason I wanted to show you this recipe today was because of the nature of the fluffy donut against the fluffy mousse. You really want to match textures when you're using a mousse in a recipe. It's so important. I'm deciding if pouring or piping is better. What do you think, Michael? Should I pour it or pipe it?
What would you pour it with?
Oh, I've got a pitcher I can use.
No, pipe it.
Pipe it? Okay. That could get a little messy. Let's see what happens.
Pour it then.
Yay! I'll be right back. I'm gonna pipe it. So, no tip in my large piping bag. I'll just get it in place here. And man, I'm going through the whisks and the spatulas today, aren't I? I'll help you clean up. How's everybody doing?
Lots of questions about the pans and so on.
Oh, okay. Well, these are only available in Canada right now, but these pans are actually my own line. So if you're in Canada, you can find them at the Bay, and hoping to get them around the world if we can. There we go. So this recipe makes 18 donuts. You can do this with this type of batter. There aren't any whipped egg whites or anything sensitive in this. You can do it in batches if you only have one donut pan. You can also find the mini donut pans. That works just as well. Your yield will be almost triple though, because those are really dainty, but great. If you're having a big party, who's having a big party? This is our party. This is our way to celebrate together, which is fantastic.
They could use a muffin tin.
A muffin tin would work beautifully. You can either grease the muffin tin or you can use paper liners and you should be just fine. What's key to this recipe is make sure your oven is preheated to 400 degrees, 200 Celsius. That is so important because otherwise, I learned the hard way, if even at 375, you don't get the fluff. And you'll find like a muffin, it'll bake up and then spread out. What I love about this recipe is it bakes up so you get that full round donut shape that it looks just like it came out of a fryer, but of course, it hasn't. Okay, now I'm gonna start back here. This is when you see me pipe on my other Oh Yum videos, I always tell the director which direction I'm starting in and ending in. And then I don't always listen to my own advice. So you wanna fill these about 3/4 full.
Some piping music.
You definitely don't want me to sing. We like our viewers. Now, the great thing is these only take 8 minutes, 10 max to bake. So I'm gonna put these in the oven and you are gonna see them come out of the oven before I sign off. I want you to see how easy these are to do. And you'll notice, maybe you can see the shininess on the pan. Even a nonstick pan, I do grease because the nonstick surface ensures, and it's a silicone-based surface, ensures that things will come out evenly without cracking, but you still want to grease your pan. Otherwise, it depends on the nature of the recipe itself. And so some are more prone to stick than others. So in these go. I'm going to set the timer for 8 minutes. And so you'll see these come out of the oven. I have Magica Television View though, and I baked some ahead of time. So I thought we could pipe these while we wait for the other ones to bake. So here they are out of the oven, and they've got that, they're fluffier than a cupcake, honestly. It baffles me how they puff up in the oven. And hopefully I'll remember in a few minutes and I'll show you partway through what they look like. Um, Faith is asking, oh,
Giant donut.
Faith is asking if we can fry these donuts. That's a good question, Faith. This batter would not suit frying. A donut that's fried is more of a dense dough that has to be either scooped or rolled so that it holds its shape. I mean, you could end up with something almost funnel cake like, perhaps, but I haven't tried it. I would stick with this formula for baking only, but that's a very good question. Okay, I've got sprinkles. I thought today deserves some sprinkles. And because this white chocolate mousse needs a good 90 minutes to sit, I made this right before we went on camera. And look at that consistency. See how it sets up? So you can imagine if you take a knife to cut, you can get a nice clean slice when you cut into it, if it's in a tart or in a cake. But yet, when you taste it, it just melts away. So it does suit piping. I give it a little stir only because it only has been in the refrigerator for 90 minutes. And so the outside will likely be more set than the center. So this just evens it up a little bit, smooths it out. People seem surprised that you can do this, but yes, you can stir a mousse even after it's chilled. There we go. I can see sort of a creamy texture there. I've got a piping bag with a large star tip. And we're going to pipe this mousse on top of our donuts. So you've got this mild, sweet, creamy, fluffy white chocolate mousse on top of these fluffiest dark chocolate baked donuts. And donuts are pretty hot right now. I mean, you have to admit. And they provide such a great piping opportunity. So go nuts. You don't have to stop where I stopped just by piping the white chocolate mousse on. You could do the drizzles. You could do the caramel. You could add slices of banana and then caramelized sugar on top of it. Just get creative. So see how nicely that pipes? It holds its definition, but yet it still has that fluffiness to it. Once you get the mousse on here, these donuts have to go in the fridge. If you weren't bothering with the piping, you could do a chocolate or vanilla glaze. You could color it however you wanted. You could color this white chocolate mousse. I would color it when you dissolve the gelatin in. Or even when you have melted the white chocolate, definitely before you add the whipped cream to play with the color tone. Pink would be nice. A little coconut on top, whatever you like on your donut. Toffee bits. So what do you think? Is this a keeper? Are you glad you stuck around for the surprise? And even if you couldn't and you're tuning in later, surprise! We've got white chocolate mousse topped chocolate donuts. Made better with sprinkles. Those donuts have been in 4 minutes. There's so many sprinkle options out there, and it's up to you. Sometimes I find it easier to buy the separate colors and mix my own blends, or you can buy the pre-blended, depending on what people like. Even these little pearls they're just sugar candy. They're edible. I'm going to take a picture of these after, so TJ has them for this recipe when we post it. So, is that enough sprinkles, Michael? What do you think?
Yes.
Excellent. Oh, this has been great fun. And I hope you learned a lot about sort of the foundation and the essence of chocolate mousse. Let's take a peek at, see how those are cooking up? It's been 5 minutes. Look at that volume you get from that hot oven and that particular recipe, that combination of the buttermilk with the baking powder. I can't believe it. 5 minutes, and that's what they do. So just another, I don't want to let all the heat out of the oven. Just another 3 minutes, and then I will pull them out so you get a chance to see them. Right here. And oh, I'm going to take a bite into the chocolate donuts. Don't you worry. But let's take this couple of minutes, last few minutes, to take a few questions because you've been so wonderful staying with me today. Oh, someone's asking for Jenny. Good question. A video for shortbreads. I love getting your ideas. I remember someone asked last week about choux paste. I love making choux paste. So maybe a profiterole eclair. Dare I make a croquant bouche in front of you live? I seem to be pretty daring so far. Lots of great ideas. Hello, hola from Barcelona again. Oh, Diego, yes. Could you add matcha green tea to the white chocolate mousse? I think that would be a great idea. I would too dissolve it in the milk so that you know, and so you get the proper color and flavor addition to your taste. But yes, I would definitely go for matcha green tea there. Uh, More gluten-free baking from Words Are My Trade. Okay, I will keep that in mind. And in fact, I have a whole repertoire of new gluten-free recipes I've been working on. So maybe I won't keep them a secret like I did my fluffy baked chocolate donuts. We'll make sure you know, and knowing how and where to use your substitutions and play with new recipes is great. Um, choo, choo, choo. Oh, a banana bread recipe. Oh, you know what? Banana bread. I have a great recipe for the best banana muffins that I am actually holding on to for the new series that will be coming to this Oh Yum channel in the near future. As soon as we can get our team together to put everything in place. In the meantime, you can count on me being here for you for these Oh Yum 101 live streams because they're great. And keeping on top of my ingredients that I have available too. And I don't have ripe banana, so maybe I should plan for that. What to do if you don't have a candy thermometer, but you have a meat thermometer? Nachi or Nasi, that's a really good question. A candy thermometer is very handy when you're baking, especially when you're caramelizing sugar and you need to hit it to a particular temperature for, say, an Italian buttercream, or if you're making nougat or other candies. A meat thermometer, the kind that gets inserted in the roast at the beginning of the cooking process, will not work. If you have an instant read meat thermometer, it might do the trick. So give it a try. But the kind that has to stay in the meat won't work for a candy thermometer. But that's a good tip because maybe I could go through the sugar levels and show you by temperature and by feel how to safely do that.
A lot of meat thermometers don't go high enough.
Oh, they don't go high enough. Yeah, good point. The digital ones, which are multi-purpose. Yeah, good point, Michael. Look at those. I don't want them to come near my mousse muffins. And so just like a sponge cake, I check the doneness by touching the top. When it springs back, it's done. Aren't those amazing? 8 minutes, come on. Chocolate chip cookies take longer to make. They take 10 minutes. I think that's amazing. I'll let these cool in the tin for a few minutes and then I'll pop them out. Yeah, they're way too hot right now. I don't want to squish them. Oh, but they smell amazing. They smell like a rich chocolate cake. You saw how easy that was. So I've given you the foundations of dark chocolate mousse. I've given you something more involved with the white chocolate mousse. And then the surprise, I made donuts for you. The easy, fluffy chocolate baked donuts. So I'm going to sign off now. Please, if you're making any of these recipes, a reminder, this donut recipe will be on this video that will come up on the Oh Yum channel. Just give us a little time to get it up there and you can watch it all again, start to finish. Do keep baking with me. I'll see you next Thursday for another exciting Oh Yum 101. And Michael says bye. It's about the texture, creamy and fluffy. Want one?
Thank you.
Oh, what a treat. Oh, and the donuts freeze well too, without the mousse, without the mousse. Bye, everybody.